scientific revolution of the 17th century was a revolution precisely because it said that nature is not organic and alive, which is what everyone had believed before, but inanimate and machine-like. That's what gave us science as we know it. Before that, in Europe, as elsewhere in the world, people thought that the Earth was a living being, Mother Earth. People thought that nature was alive, the whole cosmos had a soul, the anima mundi in Latin. The official doctrine taught in the universities of Oxford and Cambridge and all the other medieval universities was based on Aristotle's doctrine of the soul. All living things have souls. Even magnets had souls on this view. Plants have a plant soul. The soul of the plant shapes the form of the plant. The soul is the form of the body, as Aristotle and St. Thomas Aquinas said. And the soul of the oak tree, as it were, shapes the growing seedling, attracting it towards the mature form of the oak tree. The soul works through attraction, and it gives every organism its form. Animals, in addition to the vegetative soul that shapes the growth of the embryo, have an animal soul that organizes their instincts, movements, sensations, and so forth, underlies the senses and the responses to the senses and the movements of the animals. And of course the English word animal comes from the Latin word anima, which means soul, as in the word animate. And according to St. Thomas Aquinas in the 12th century, one of the greatest of the doctors of the Christian Church, the human soul is embedded within the vegetative soul that shapes our bodies, the animal soul that gives us our animal nature. Most of our nature is very similar to that of animals, but in addition we have the rational or conscious mind capable of reason and language and thought. That's what makes humans different, but this human rational soul is embedded within this much larger psychic system that links us to animals and plants. This was the view of nature which was overthrown by the scientific revolution. And it not only led to a new kind of theory of nature, but also a new kind of theology. Because the God of the living nature of the Middle Ages was the living God of a living world, a kind of organic God of an organic world. But the machine theory that came in the 17th century gave a different kind of theology. God was like a machine maker who designed and made all the machinery of life, as it were, from outside. It was casting God in the image of technological man. God was like an engineer and a mathematician. And the forms and purposes of things came from outside, not from inside. When living organisms were thought of as organisms, they had their own purposes, their own goals. What this revolution did was took the purposes and goals and shapes and forms, the designs, as they were called, out of living organisms and put them outside nature in the mind of God. So everything in nature became mechanical. The difference between a machine and an organism is that machines have no designs or purposes of their own. They have to be designed by an external intelligence, a human engineer, made by external makers, people in factories, and they have no purposes of their own. By contrast, organisms do. If you get into a car, as long as it's in working order, it will go wherever you want it to go. It doesn't have any purpose of its own. If you get on a horse, it might have its own ideas about where it wants to go. During the Grand National, I put my money in a sweepstake on the favourite, Synchronised. And Synchronised turned out to be the least synchronised of all the horses. It took about 10 minutes to get synchronised to the starting post. No, organisms differ from machines. They have it within themselves, their goals, their purposes and their designs. Well, they're not really designs, because design implies from outside, but they're forms. So this revolution transformed our view of nature. It made matter unconscious. It made everything mechanical or machine-like, and it created a new kind of theology with God as a kind of world engineer and designer, external to nature. For many of the founders of modern science, this was fine, because they were all Christians, and they thought this strengthened arguments for God. It gave God more to do by giving nature less to do. But in the end, it produced an image of God which many people find quite incredible. as a kind of external designer. Most atheism is a reaction against this vision of God, which is not the traditional one in the Christian or any other tradition. So, what does this tell us really? It's basically a metaphor. It says that we understand nature in terms of the machine metaphor. But it's not something that's proved. It's not something that has evidence to many places of decimals. It's simply a metaphor. And it has a certain amount going for it. It's quite helpful to think of aspects of our bodies as machine-like. Our bones are a bit like levers, our heart's a bit like a pump, our eyes a bit like a camera. Our brain is perhaps a little bit like a computer. But it doesn't mean we are machines, and it doesn't mean the whole universe is a machine. People used to think of it as a kind of clockwork machine, but since the Big Bang theory became orthodox in the 1960s, we have a completely different vision of the universe. It started very small, very less than the size of a head of a pin, and very hot. And it's been expanding and cooling ever since. And as it expands and cools, new forms and structures appear within it. Atoms, molecules, galaxies, stars, planets. None of those were there at the beginning. It's much more, in fact, like a developing organism, like an embryo developing from a fertilized egg, than it is like any machine we know of. Many philosophers have criticized the machine analogy. David Hume in the 18th century, for example, thought that it was a very poor analogy for the natural world, that it's much better to think of the natural world as a living organism than as a machine. The Gaia theory, the idea of the Earth as a living organism, is one way in which this new way of thinking has come back into science. It's not exactly new, of course, because that's what people always used to think. It's what most people in the world still do think. But in the end, the idea that nature is mechanical is only a metaphor. We have to think in metaphors. But it makes a lot better sense, in my view, as a biologist, to think of living organisms as living organisms. You just don't need to force everything into this particular metaphor of the machine. It's not proved, it's not even provable. It's just an assumption that's become a habit of thought, and I think is actually rather a harmful and limiting habit. It justifies treating animals and plants as machines with no feelings or intelligence, and it's the philosophy that underlies modern agribusiness and factory farming. So when it's actually applied, it has most terrible consequences, but it's treated as if it's a truth. It's not. It's just a habit of thinking.